In the early 1800s, Qing China still looked powerful on paper, but daily life strained under the weight of too many people and too little land. Harvests failed, rents rose, and debts hardened into permanent misery. Local officials were meant to protect the countryside, yet many squeezed it instead, taking extra fees and looking away when the strong bullied the weak. The system collected order. It also collected anger. That anger spread fastest in the south, where migrants and long-settled communities competed for fields, water, and jobs. When disputes flared, people expected the state to settle them fairly. Often it did not. Corruption turned justice into a market, and the poor rarely afforded it. Banditry, secret societies, and local militias filled the gaps, each promising safety while adding new pressures. In many villages, hardship stopped feeling temporary and started feeling normal. Into this brittle world came something unfamiliar. Western missionaries and Christian writings, carried along trade routes and handed out in market towns. Most people ignored them, but the pamphlets lingered because they offered simple ideas in plain language. One God, moral rules, a battle between good and evil, and the promise of a transformed world. In a society where officials sounded distant and hope felt scarce, a small tract could land like a spark. Hong Xiuquan came from the Hakka, a migrant community that often sat on the edges of local power. He bet everything on one ladder up, the imperial exams. Passing meant status, salary, and influence. Failing meant years lost and a family still trapped at the bottom. He tried again and again. Each attempt demanded more study, more travel, more money. Each failure landed harder. His ambition stayed fixed. The system refused him. After one of these defeats, Hong encountered Christian pamphlets, the kind missionaries and their Chinese helpers handed out in the south. They offered a simple claim: one true God judged the world, and salvation depended on believing the right message. For Hong, already exhausted and humiliated, the words did not sit like ordinary reading. They pressed on a mind under strain. Soon he collapsed into a breakdown. He drifted through fevered dreams and violent confusion, unable to return to his old routine. Hong eventually recovered enough to function, but he did not return to the exams with the same faith in their meaning. The collapse left a residue. The pamphlets lingered, and his visions stayed lodged in his memory like unfinished business. Over time, the pieces began to lock together in his head. Failure stopped looking like personal weakness and started looking like proof that a different path had been chosen for him. The idea hardened into certainty. Hong believed he had a divine mission. Hong no longer treated his visions as a personal illness. He treated them as evidence. The Christian pamphlets he had once skimmed became a dictionary for what he thought he had seen: heaven, sin, salvation, demons, judgment. He reread his memories through those words until the pieces seemed to lock together. What had been confusion became a story with a clear plot. And in that plot, Hong did not stand at the edge. He recast the highest figure of Chinese tradition as a false god and placed the Christian God above all others. Then he made the most explosive claim of all. He declared himself the younger brother of Jesus. It sounded impossible, but it gave his mission absolute authority. If he was family to the Saviour, then his orders were not opinions. They were heaven's instructions, delivered through him. That claim changed what his faith required him to do. His revelations no longer called for quiet belief. They demanded action against enemies. Idols became targets. Rival spirits became threats. And the people who defended old temples became obstacles to God's plan. Hong's private crisis turned outward and hardened into a radical theology built for conflict. Once he named himself, he also named what had to be destroyed. In Guangxi, Hong did not just preach. He built structure. He and a small circle of close allies gathered scattered converts into a single body they called the God Worshippers. They went where anger already sat close to the surface. Poor villages, migrant communities, people pushed aside by landlords and officials. Each new believer added more than faith. They added protection, labor, and numbers. The movement stopped looking like rumor and started acting like a force. Organization came next, and it came with rules. The God worshippers rejected old rituals and local temples, and they treated that rejection as a test of loyalty. They banned alcohol, gambling, prostitution, and opium, and they demanded discipline in daily life. Belief became visible, measurable, enforceable. Members met regularly, pooled resources, and followed leaders who kept records and settled disputes. In a region used to scattered unrest, this created something different, a community that held together. Those moral demands did not just purify the group, they hardened it. The strict code separated insiders from everyone else, and that line grew sharper with every conversion. People who felt powerless found status inside the movement, and people with grudges found a cause that sounded holy. As the God worshippers expanded, discipline made them predictable, and predictability made them usable. Hong's message stopped being only a promise of salvation. It became a machine for turning discontent into coordinated action. The God worshippers stopped behaving like a hidden sect and started acting like a rival authority. Their strict rules and growing numbers brought them into direct conflict with local officials who tried to tax, arrest, and break them apart. Each crackdown produced a backlash. Believers regrouped, armed themselves, and resisted. Villages split, then entire districts. What began as scattered clashes with constables and hired militia turned into running fights that neither side could quietly end. By 1851, the movement faced a simple choice: dissolve or rise. It rose. The God worshippers launched an open uprising, not as bandits, but as a force that claimed moral and religious legitimacy. They attacked local yamen offices, seized weapons, and pushed out Qing representatives where they could. This turned a local security problem into a political crisis. Now officials did not just face unrest, they faced a rebellion that announced it meant to replace them. In that same year, the rebels named their new state the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. It sounded like a promise of peace, but it rested on war from the start. Hong Xiuquan stood at the center and took the title Heavenly King, placing himself above ordinary rulers and framing victory as a divine command. The uprising now carried a clear banner and a chain of command. From this point on, compromise grew harder. The fight became a contest over who ruled China. By 1853, the Taiping forces did not just survive in the south, they moved. Columns of soldiers pushed up the great river routes, taking city after city with a speed that shocked Qing officials. Local defenses broke, some gates opened, and others fell after brief, brutal assaults. This march north changed the rebellion's purpose. It stopped looking like a regional revolt. It started looking like a new government on the move. Their target became Nanjing, one of China's most important cities, strategically placed and symbolically powerful. When the Taiping took it, the victory carried a message. The Qing could be beaten in the heart of the empire. The conquerors did not treat Nanjing as a temporary base. They renamed it Tianjin, the heavenly capital, and declared it the center of a new sacred order. The rebellion now had a throne city. From Tianjin, the Taiping leadership set out to rule as much as to fight. Authority flowed from religious claims, not tradition, and laws followed what they called divine command. The capital became a factory for commands, appointments, and punishments, designed to reshape daily life and remake China's moral foundation. It sounded like certainty, it acted like a revolution, and it forced every surrounding province to choose submission, resistance, or war. Once Tianjin held, the Taiping leaders acted like they had to freeze the revolution in place. Rules tightened into daily control. Men and women stayed separated. Private trade and old customs fell under suspicion. People got watched, reported, and punished for small breaks in discipline. The movement promised a pure new order, but it delivered constant enforcement. And the more the regime demanded obedience, the more it depended on fear to keep the city and its armies in line. Power also hardened at the top. The Heavenly King withdrew behind ritual and proclamations, while other senior commanders ran the war and the government. Their titles sounded equal, but their influence did not. Each man built his own network of officers, guards, and loyal followers. Victory had created a new problem, no clear limit on ambition. Suspicion grew into accusations of disloyalty, secret plots, and false faith. The leadership spent more energy watching itself than watching the enemy. That tension ended in a purge. Armed forces inside the Taiping capital turned on other Taiping forces, and senior leaders and their households got slaughtered. The killings did not stop cleanly. They spread as people settled scores and proved loyalty by joining in. The regime survived, but it changed. Experienced commanders disappeared, trust collapsed, and decisions slowed under fear. The Taiping state kept its holy language, yet it bled from inside, right when it needed unity most. After the Taiping seized a capital, the Qing court did not simply surrender. It adapted. Instead of relying only on the old central army, loyalist officials built new forces closer to home, paid for by local elites who feared collapse. Men like Zheng Guofan organized the Xiang army, trained it, fed it, and tied its survival to their own communities. The fight became more personal, more organized, and harder to stop. The Qing also reached for help that once seemed unthinkable. Foreign merchants wanted open trade and stable ports, not a spreading holy war. So Western officers and money-backed modernized units that used rifles, artillery, and drill. One famous force, the ever-victorious army, fought alongside Qing commanders and helped push the Taiping back from key cities. This outside support did not decide everything, but it shifted the balance at critical moments. As both sides hardened, civilians paid the price. Armies lived off the land, and whole regions lost their crops before they ever reached a battlefield. When towns resisted, punishment followed, and massacres became a method of control. Refugees flooded roads, disease spread, and famine took hold where markets and irrigation failed. The rebellion turned into a grinding disaster measured in emptied villages and mass graves. The death toll rose into the tens of millions. By 1864, the war narrowed to one place that mattered most, Tianjin. Qing commanders tightened their ring around the city and treated time as a weapon. Roads and canals fell under their control, then farms, then the last supply routes. Inside, Taiping officials tried to keep order, but hunger and fear overran rules and prayers. The capital that once promised a new China started to break from the inside out. Hong Xiuquan did not lead a last great breakout. He died as the siege reached its final stage, leaving the movement without its sacred center at the moment it needed it most. Taiping leaders elevated his teenage son, but a title could not replace authority, experience, or belief. Qing troops breached the defences and fought street by street until the Taiping court collapsed. Tianjin fell back into Qing hands, and the Heavenly Kingdom effectively ended. The destruction did not stop with the capture of the city. Qing forces and local militias pursued surviving Taiping soldiers, officials, and suspected supporters across the region, determined to erase any chance of revival. Surrenders often meant execution, escape meant years of hiding. Former Taiping strongholds were cleared, leaders were paraded and killed, and communities were punished for helping them. What remained of the Taiping state was not conquered and absorbed, it was hunted down and wiped out. In China today, the Taiping Rebellion sat in memory as a warning, not just a revolt, but a civil war that tore whole provinces apart. It left cities emptied, farmland ruined, families scattered, and a death toll so vast it became hard to picture as individual lives. What shocked later generations most was the engine behind it. It grew from a belief that the world stood on the edge of a final, holy transformation. That kind of belief was called millenarian, the certainty that history was about to end, and that true believers had a duty to force the new age into being. In the Taiping case, religion did not sit beside politics, it drove it. The movement's leaders treated opponents as enemies of heaven, not simply rivals for power. That mindset made compromise feel like betrayal, and it made violence feel like obedience. That was the cruel contrast people later returned to. The catastrophe began without armies, without grand strategy, without state backing. It began with thin missionary tracts passed hand to hand, and with one man's crushing exam failures, disappointment turning into certainty. From those small sparks came a claim of divine authority, then a mass movement, then a war that consumed millions. Memory held the ending, but it never forgot the scale of the beginning.